Hello, everyone. This is EMAN HAIQAL, and welcome to my podcast. Today, I will be examining AdventureQuest Worlds, a fantasy narrative set in the world of lore through the perspective of literature and the environment. The text unfolds in a world shaped by prolonged conflict between forces of good, evil, and chaos, where landscapes are repeatedly altered by war, domination, and pursuit of power. Rather than presenting nature as a stable or restorative force, Adventure Quest Worlds imagines an environment marked by instability, corruption, and a lasting damage. Now, within environmental literary studies, texts that engage with ecological collapse often emerge from moments of crisis, whether it is industrialization, modern warfare, or climate anxiety. Adventure Quest Worlds reflects these concerns through a fantasy settings that mirrors real-world ecological uncertainty. Its landscapes are shaped not by the natural cycles alone, but by the accumulated consequences of human and humanoid ambition. I will analyze the Adventure Quest world using an eco-critical framework, focusing on how the narrative presents the relationship between human and the natural world. I argue that the text presents an Anthropocene vision of nature, where one environmental damage is cumulative and resistant to human control, while also drawing on post human ideas that dissent human authority within ecological system. Now, the environment of Adventure Quest worlds are rarely portrayed as untouched wilderness. Across the world of lore, we can see where the forests decay, elemental realms fracture, and entire regions becoming distorted by magical and political interference. These spaces function as narrative environments that record the consequences of domination rather than merely hosting a heroic action. This representation aligns closely with the concept of the Anthropocene, a term used to describe an era in which human activity has become a dominant force shaping planetary systems. In Anthropocene narratives, nature is no longer separate from humanity. It bears the visible and invisible marks of humans' ambition, exploitation, and error. In Adventure Quest worlds, environmental instability is not an accident of nature, but rather a direct outcome of power being imposed upon it. The Chaos Lord's narrative reinforces this idea. The chaos does not originate from the land itself, but from efforts to control, weaponize, or extract from it. Ecosystem collapse not because nature is hostile, but rather because the balance has been repeatedly disrupted, reframing the environmental destruction as a relational failure rather than a natural inevitability. Importantly, the game itself, or Adventure Quest World, also challenges the anthropocentric thinking. Now, while the narrative follows a heroic figure, the world does not reliably respond to human intention. There are attempts to restore order, which often result in further instability. This situation right here reflects the post humanist thought, which questions the assumption that humans occupy the center of agency, meaning, or any authority. Non human forces within the narrative, including elemental beings, corrupted landscapes, and chaotic entities. Now, they are not actually portrayed as something inherently evil. Instead, they function as the responses, as the result of imbalance. They embody the ecological consequences rather than the moral opposition, and showing how the conflict emerged not from the nature's resistance to humanity itself, but from humanity's refusal to recognize the ecological limits. Another of the key eco-critical element in the text is environmental memory. We can see in the game where regions affected by chaos do not return to an original or innocent state once threats are removed. Instead, they remain altered, showing that the environment remembers what has been done to it. This challenges narratives of ecological resilience that assume nature will always recover if human interference ends. Nature in Adventure Quest worlds functions as an archive. It absorbs all the damage, it stores the consequences, and reshapes itself in response. The land bears witness to past actions long after their causes have faded. This positions nature as something which is not passive, but rather an active participant in the narrative. Now, the ecological concerns presented in Adventure Quest worlds resonate strongly with real world environmental discourse. Contemporary landscapes are increasingly shaped by the long term effects of industrialization, pollution, and climate change. Like the wall of lore, these environments are not untouched nature, but Anthropocene spaces shaped by human presence even in its absence. This perspective echoes the environmental thought of a dominant person, Rachel Carson. In Silent Spring, Carson exposed how chemical pollution produces delayed and often invisible ecological consequences. Her work demonstrated that environmental harm does not end when the action stops. It actually persists, accumulates, and will return in altered forms. Similarly, Adventure Quest Worlds imagines a world living with the aftermath of ecological disruption rather than its immediate causes. Now, while both of these challenges the illusion of control, Costin dismantles the beliefs that humans can dominate nature without consequences, while Adventure Quest World dramatizes this failure through fantasy landscape that resists restoration. Together, they reveal how environmental damage reshapes worlds in ways that cannot simply be undone. In conclusion, Adventure Quest Worlds presents a compelling ecological narrative by reimagining nature as an altered, responsive, and remembering presence. Through its Anthropocene landscapes and post human visions, the text challenges human centered assumptions about control, progress, and recovery. Rather than offering some kind of reassurance, it raises an urgent ecological question. Can human learn to coexist within a world that no longer revolves around it? In its unstable terrains and corrupted environments, Adventure Quest Worlds reminds us that the natural worlds carries the memory of every intervention imposed upon it, and that ecological responsibility begins with recognizing these limits. That's all from me. Thank you for listening. See you in the next episode.